to move on to more the present day, would you share with us something about this new book project you're working on?
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this one. I and scared because it's the third book in a series. And the series is called the Snow Chronicles, and Snow stands for Spynet Online. And the series is based on a true story, and there's all kinds of other true stories baked into the series. I do so much research on my books. It takes me longer to do the research on a book than it does to write the book. One book took me 12 years. Most of my books take 2 or 3. And in the story that started this one was a true story. I had discovered, I had mentioned earlier, I had worked on various forms of artificial intelligence throughout my career, was one of the early implementers, understood the technologies and where it was going and but this was a number of years ago, before AI was really the word. And I had stumbled upon a very obscure article that said that a program had escaped they named the laboratory, it was an NSA spy lab. So a program had escaped an NSA spy lab and they couldn't find it. And they were looking for anybody who had information to call either this FBI agent or this particular professor at the lab.
Hold on a minute, hold on a minute. How does a program escape a lab?
Bingo. Bingo. I looked at that article. I read it 3 times. I cut it out. I taped it onto my monitor. I looked at it every single day for months, asking that same question. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe they meant to say it was lost. It was stolen. It was broken. It didn't work right. But it was an Associated Press article. And I thought, well, these guys are pretty good at checking their facts. You'd think that that would be something that somebody would catch. I couldn't find any other story about it. I looked up every other magazine. I couldn't find anything else. And I finally decided, what if it was true? And I, being the nerd that I am, and at the time I was a single parent, so I had to stay home every night, and I didn't have a social life. Not that I had any money for a social life. Because
well, you had a small social life with a very small...
I had a very small social life of one. He needed a lot of attention. He very needy. But I would have a lot of time at night, and so I thought, well, maybe I can figure this out. I just stupid kind of, but I did. I spent several months researching different architectures and different technologies. And I said, well, how would I do it if I were going to do that? Right. So I started saying, okay, guy, rather than asking the dumb question, just go solve the problem. Right. Go figure out how they would do that. Technology and architecture, you know how to do this stuff. So I spent several months figuring out exactly how they would have to build this kind of program to escape. Now, escape meant several things to me. It meant some form of base level of intelligence or intelligent design. It meant the ability for the program to move itself, which meant replicating files. It meant that it could replicate files to another server. In order for those files to survive, they had to stay hidden, which meant that it had to be able to go through and erase the logs, had somehow to control to erase the logs after it, so they didn't know where it went, so they couldn't follow it. And it came up with all these different things. And then I thought, well, so why would they do that? What were they trying to do with this thing that they designed it that way? And so I thought, I watched a James Bond movie, and I thought, well, I'm gonna be Q. I'm Q. I'm the tech Q. So I went around I went to the data center, and I walked around. And I asked a bunch of questions. So what about this, and how? And I came up with all kinds of ideas, just random ideas of how I would make my perfect invisible spy program. If I had an invisible spy program, that's cool. What would I want it to do? And so I came up with a bunch of stuff. And then at the time, I had a friend who was a film producer, an indie film producer. And I went to him and I said, Jack, I think I had this great idea for a movie. And I told him all about this. And he was all excited. And we said, well, what are we going to do? And we kind of developed the basic frame of who the characters were and what the situations were and all that kind of stuff. And instead of a film script, we said, well, let's do this as a webisode series, because this is an internet-based program. Let's do it there. We can pilot the idea. right? We can write some scripts, hire some out of work actors, do some shoots, create some digital sets that looked very cool and, Star Trekky and all that kind of stuff. And we produced about 12 episodes, won about 20 awards, got optioned by one of the studios. One of my biggest fan, who wrote to me at least 6 times, was the director of flight operations for NASA Space Center in Houston. And I knew he was somebody special because his alias was Orbit at NASA.gov. It wasn't Guy at NASA or Guy Morris. It was Orbit. And everybody's supposed to know who Orbit is. I didn't know. I found out who he was afterwards, but it was, so I knew this a high up guy in NASA. So I was really excited until 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were not excited.
They were not there for coffee.
They were not there for coffee. Now, when they first showed up at my door, I thought my friend Jack was pulling a prank on me. He had gotten a couple of his other actor friends to come to my door and harass me. So I'm just laughing at these guys, and I'm like, no, you're from Jack. I said, well, show me your badges again. And I had to look real close, like, oh, you guys are a real thing. So I invite them in, and of course, I immediately know why they're there. And I hadn't broken any laws. I hadn't hacked anything. I hadn't done anything illegal.